Dear friends, today we have Andreas Fischer, founding partner at First Momentum Ventures. This is a very interesting interview that I recommend you to listen because these guys built the first VC out of some group of students that in 2018 decided to go for VC, which is a very rare case in the industry. Also, they're very specialized in deep tech solutions and also in deep tech hardware solutions, which is like the most difficult between the most difficult things to finance. And it probably is the longest interview so far, but it's worth until the very end. So I hope you like it. Andreas Fischer, happy to have you here.
It's awesome to be here.
Thanks for coming. I'm going to go straight to the first question. And is the first, you claim that you have the first student-run VC in the DACH region. So can you explain a little bit more about how First Momentum was created and why? And if this claim is true or is just marketing?
Well, I mean, as background, we're all engineers that started First Momentum, so I don't think that we're that savvy in marketing to just come up with a slogan that's not true.
But you have something like engineers by heart and investors by, how is it?
Engineers at heart, investors by choice.
Yeah, that's it. I like it. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, but this also took a lot of work. But I think generally First Momentum kind of pretty much organically grew out of the startup university ecosystem in Karlsruhe. So we all kind of studied at KIT. We're active in a student entrepreneurship group, similar to what you have here at TU Munich. Mm-hmm. The group was called Pionier Garage. So kind of getting people excited about startups, getting them excited about building their own thing, not directly going to Daimler or Bosch, but kind of let's use your brain for something useful.
What
first.
do you mean by that?
And we did a lot of startup tours with that group to Silicon Valley, to China, to India. We always came back with a lot of excitement from kind of seeing those ecosystems, and then also a lot of frustration just seeing basically you have the same inputs in Germany as you have in those other ecosystems. You have great universities, you have great engineering talent. You, in theory, have a lot of money that can be invested. You also have an industrial base that you don't necessarily have in the Valley. But you just don't see the same level of output compared to those ecosystems. And one thing that we saw that was missing was just investors that take very early bets on technology and technical-driven founders. And at that point, I think we were 21, 22, something like this. We read an article like, it's relatively easy to set up a fund in Germany. We obviously immediately believed that.
You believed it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe we needed that little bit of naivete to get started. But we kicked off the first fund in 2018. And by now, we kind of scratched the student-led label and just kind of, with developing First Momentum as well, kind of grew it into being a specialist fund for pre-seed or call it first round, whatever, and specialized on very technical topics that can be really deep tech stuff, where it's a university spin out with founders that have done their PhD on the topic and now are kind of moving stuff out of the lab, or that can be just kind of very technical founders that have worked in the startup ecosystem or tech ecosystem and now are kind of upgrading step by step the level of technicality that they're working on.
We will get back to that. I don't want to miss this point of in 2018 you built your first fund. So I can imagine that how many were you? The ones that
the initial group was 5, but then it kind of narrowed down on 2, and then kind of we started taking it from student project to kind of growing it into an actual VC.
Okay, so how was then at the beginning when you were like, okay, I saw these ecosystems in other parts of the world. I think it makes sense to build something. Who would trust you? Who would give you money at the beginning? How big was the fund?
Yeah. So fund 1 was just shy of 5 million. And kind of we basically fundraised the first amount, started investing, then went to the next investor, said, "Hey, look at the cool investments we've made. Do you want to give us more money?" So kind of we fundraised over quite a period of time, and then always kept investing. And the first batch of investors was basically entrepreneurs that have built their company maybe in the kind of first internet wave, exited the company, and now wanted to kind of be part of what is coming next, and also to some degree give back to those ecosystems that help them succeed. And then also a lot of family offices of this kind of typical German industrial companies that were, I think, drawn to that aspect of, hey, those guys are really close to the university ecosystems. They see what is happening there. And so for them, I think it's a mix of just the financial investment and also getting this window on technology and kind of seeing what is coming out of those universities.
It's curious because with the offer that you have in here in Germany, also with big top tier funds with billions assets under management, why do you think you managed to convince your first LPs? That I guess it would be the most difficult one, because then you have track record, you can show, and you have something, right, to rely on. But at the beginning, why do you think they trusted you, especially if you were so young?
I mean, I'm not sure entirely about the precise number, but I think we had roughly 2,000 conversations with LPs for, in the end, 30 ish LPs that converted. So it was also a numbers game in that sense. I think to a degree it was also a bet on, hey, if First Momentum 1 is working out, then they will raise a second fund, and this will be way more professionalized than Fund 2. But I already kind of have this connection with a fund. I think also to a degree because some of the funds have gotten quite large, and so they have large minimum tickets that they require from LPs. And I think if you look back at 2018 as well, this was also part of the motivation or the reason why we started First Momentum was if you look at the typical VC profile at that point, it was still very much consumer and enterprise SaaS. So the typical VC was probably a WHU graduate that worked a little bit in startup world, maybe at Rocket Internet, maybe in consulting, and then kind of graduated into being a VC. But you didn't really have technical people. The first kind of deep tech funds maybe started to emerge. And so I think we were part of that cohort to some degree. And I think we were also just something that they didn't see anywhere else in that regard.
It's curious because as a kind of a side note, this would be the third episode of the second season. And the first two have been Edis Ventures with Ethier and Matterwave with Robert, which are both engineers as well, investing in Germany. So of course it makes a lot of sense, especially if I look at it like from the outside and I say, yeah, Germany is related to engineering. It makes sense. But you go a little bit, let's say, from my understanding, you correct me if I'm wrong, deeper in the tech. So like the fact that you just said that you're the first check, probably, it makes you dig a little bit more in the technology behind it, because you will not see any traction so far. So you will always invest. We'll talk about the Deeptech Harvard napkin later. But yeah, how is that? Because I want to know both aspects. Like first, how do you do the discovery? And second, how you are able to address the team and say this is the right team or not. So first we can start with the deal flow, let's say.
Yeah. So I think for us, it's really, if you look at kind of typical Berlin-style investing, let's call it this way, then I think it's a lot about who's looking at what and kind of just trying to figure out what is the hot deal. I think for us, it's way more trying to identify the super smart people that are at the same time working on super interesting problems and coming up with super interesting solutions. And so for us, it's way more trying to find those people really early on. And this was something that we saw out of the student group as well, that you could see kind of those people starting to iterate on, okay, we kind of have this knowledge built up, so let's figure out what is the commercial path forward. And so you see them trying different things, you see them assembling different teams, kind of falling on their face, getting back up. But you could see this kind of 6-12 months before they like lightning strikes and they go out fundraising for real. Obviously, we could do this in Karlsruhe, kind of our home ecosystem, but we saw that this is happening across all of the campuses in Germany. So we started really early on also to build a large scout network, which are kind of students, PhDs, people kind of in their first career step that are just like, hey, there's an interesting person here working on an interesting problem. You should speak with them, and just kind of being the representation in that ecosystem. So this is one part of the deal flow, and then the other part that took a little bit longer, kind of for us to also establish our brand and kind of establish us in the VC ecosystem as well, is now we're getting a lot of pings from other investors that are saying, hey, I've met this interesting founder. I really like him as a founder. I like the market that they're in, but I just can't assess the technology. So we usually get the ping of like, hey, have you spoken with them? And what's your take on that? So ideally, we already are in contact with that company. Sometimes it's a new company that kind of comes out of the personal sourcing network of that investor. And I think this is also oftentimes our role. Like we're usually a co-investor. So for us, it's validating the technology and building kind of a consortium that makes funding for this company feasible. Because usually with deep tech, you have larger rounds. You don't just have a single investor that does in pre-seed, you don't have this typically anyway, but you need kind of sensible consortia and as many hands on deck as possible. And so for us, it's kind of, we're oftentimes this enabling function that either comes in when there's already some interest for a company, or more often, we're the first to speak with that company, say, hey, this looks really interesting, we like it, we're committing early, and then we're pinging other investors and saying, hey, this is interesting to us. You should look at it, we'll share our memo, and then you can kind of check off the technical due diligence in that sense as well.
You address at least 3 points that I want to dig a little bit more.
Sure.
So first you said smart people.
Yeah.
So for this, do you have like a set of universities that you are like, I already have contacts with LMU. I don't care. I don't want to pick any, but let's call it XU. So I already have contacts there with some professors maybe, or even with the organization of the university. And I want to meet the top 10 physicists. I want to meet the top 10 mathematicians. Is that the way, or how do you make it to get to the smart people?
I think for us, it's way more this bottom-up movement than the top-down version. Because not to dig at them, but like technology transfer offices at universities, usually they learn about a startup and kind of to communicate that to the outside world quite a bit later than when we would like to meet those companies. So for us, it's really kind of trying to find interesting people in those ecosystems and then ask them who are the smartest people in your circle, like who should we talk to? And maybe that's already the interesting founder, or you kind of ping pong around the ecosystem. Then we organize kind of in this community a lot of events for how do you transition from research to commercializing your research.
You organize those events with a network of universities and you invite all the students there.
Yeah. So it's kind of run by us, and then we have kind of contact points so they can send people over, and they don't have to be PhDs, but oftentimes it's kind of scientists that want to transition from this. Hey, I'm getting to the end of my research arc, and I don't want to be the postdoc kind of that continues the research, but I see that I want to take it out of the lab, and now I want to understand what is the right benchmark for kind of getting commercial agreements with a university for spin-off terms. How much money do I need to raise? How should I set up the company to make it investable for investors? Because sadly enough, we see too many companies that are just dead on arrival based on kind of screwed up cap tables or whatever. So this is kind of our way of kind of giving out information, and in return, we also get a lot of interesting people that kind of start interacting with us, with our ecosystem, and then kind of that emerges kind of automatically into our deal flow.
So a lot of active marketing and branding, let's say. So they should, that the PhDs out there, they should know that they have to contact you.
And kind of the flip side is that we're also doing a lot of outbound because I think a lot of if you take technical people, their benchmark for since they don't necessarily have kind of a large friend group of other founders that have raised already, or VCs or something like this. So their benchmark for what a VC is Höhle der Löwen or Shark Tank. And so kind of they assume they get ripped off the first minute that that kind of they're getting shaky or something.
It's true, I've seen this.
Yeah, and
they look like, you're trying to trick me, and I don't know how.
Yeah, exactly. No. Yeah. And so I think for us, it's also we need to get out and ping people on like, hey, your profile looks super interesting, or the research. I mean, people are publishing stuff, so you see what their research is, and usually they have some indication on that they might be working on something, and then just reaching out, having a first conversation with them. And I think this is also the nice part about techies. They usually are quite open to talking about tech.
Yes.
So if you can, I'm not saying that I'm on eye level on all of the tech topics, but you at least know some of the terms, some of the limitations in the field, and whatever. So you can get into a conversation quite easily, and then find that common ground and see like, hey, is this something that I want to take forward?
I see. I also related to smart people, you said, and not only smart people, but interesting problems.
Yeah.
So do you also kind of frame a little bit the ecosystem and say, I'm going for 5G, I'm not going for blockchain, I'm going for uptick cases, and I'm not going for industry 12.0?
Yeah, I mean, we for sure have kind of a internal thinking about like what are the segments that are interesting and which are maybe not as much, or where you oftentimes see pitches, but it's like it's the same story repeated over and over again, and it's more or less a dead end, or it just doesn't work for VC, so it might work for a different type of funding. I think for us it's less so about. I mean, ideally we would be able to work out a grand thesis and then figure out like who's that person that is working specifically on this one topic. But I think this is just not feasible for us given the stage that we're investing in. So it's more common for us to first have the smart, interesting founder, and then they show us something about their technology, the market that they want to enter that we didn't know before, or they frame it in a different way, where it's in like, okay, this makes actually a lot of sense. So let's dig in and validate and kind of talk with customers, talk with people from the industry, and get a feeling for, is this something that we want to back, versus just having this grand theory of how things should work. And I mean, sure, we can, if we see a founder that has developed an interesting technology and they're focusing on a super small niche market, obviously we're telling them, it's like, hey, have you thought about maybe not putting this just into, I don't know, home appliances for pets, but have you thought about semiconductors? So it's kind of, obviously it's not just we're not doing the growth stage DD type stuff where we're sending over 60 pages of DD questionnaire, but it's way more of a conversation with the founders. And I think what we hear from founders quite often is that they really appreciate having this kind of truth-seeking conversation of like, hey, let's figure out the potential of this technology. Let's figure out what the right market is. So in a sense, we're helping them also figure out the path towards commercialization. I mean, some founders, and I think this is the holy grail of a founder, is obviously someone that is technically super savvy and is also capable of turning into this commercial executive type. Not maybe necessarily from day one, but you see that they can develop in that direction, and kind of can think quite clearly about what does it take for this technology to actually become commercialized and become a product. And oftentimes this means you think about the end state, and then you try to figure out, okay, what are the milestones that are kind of reasonable to reach, and the reasonable amount of money that you need.
Yeah.
So maybe you don't start with the finished fusion plant and I need a couple billion to build this, but you're like, okay, what is the first small milestone that I can do?
Yeah. This relates to a question that I was going to do later, but now I'll do it now. That it was related to the red flags that you find in tech founders. And actually, I was going to set the example that I see sometimes that the tech founders, especially in deep tech, they're so passionate about what they do, even more than other type of founders, even that is like, man, I just love to work on technology. I love to do this. It's my life. And it's been my life for the last 10 years. So I'm so into this that I don't care about the economics. I'm just going to work on this for the rest of my life. It's like, okay, yes, but maybe you need to think about, I don't know.
Not all free founders can be this time, yes.
So, but what would be some red flags that you've seen in technical founders in this space?
Yeah. So I think one is the one that you're describing, where it's basically like you have 2-3 times the same founder stereotype in that sense, where it's this brilliant technician that is you need for a lot of those ventures, but oftentimes they also then step back over time and become more the lead scientist or something like this, and not necessarily the CEO, COO type founder. So you need to have that right mix of founders, and this is quite different from technology to technology, and also how fast you have to ramp up. I think another part is that you have founders that are, especially if you come from research, you've spent 5-6 years with a given topic, you dedicated your entire life for it and got relatively small pay for it, and then you're like, okay, now I commercialize this because now I want to. Not saying that everyone is just looking for money, but I mean to some degree it's also I want to get out of research and want to kind of get this into the world. You get kind of blind for what the rest of the market is doing, and you get to a degree also a little bit arrogant in the sense of the customer should or the user should want to use this technology because it's just so much better than what is out there. And I think it takes founders that are very pragmatic about like, why does this customer actually want to pay money for using that technology, even if it's obviously better than what they have currently, but there's just so much more than just the price or the efficiency or whatever to it. And I think this is oftentimes you're missing from founders.
It's a very good point. And it's true, I've seen it too. Like, no, they will buy it because it's 10 times faster. Yeah, I know now, but then I don't know, there's some psychological cost of change that people is also either you frame it really well or they don't. Yeah,
I mean, this is not just a deep tech thing, right? You have this with SaaS as well, but with SaaS it's way easier to validate. And so I think it's with the more technical stuff, it's just easier to be like, okay, this is obviously the right direction. I've researched this for 5 years. I'm 100% certain. Let's just give me 4 million euros for this and I'll build it. And it's like, well, with whom have you spoken? And it's kind of, this is also then quite nice if we can maybe bring in some people from their potential customer side and validate with them. I mean, we can talk with them, but we can also just bring those two sides together. Ideally, the founders already have kind of done some extent or relatively extensive research on this before they decide, okay, this is what I'm dedicating my next 5 to 10 years to, or maybe even longer. So I think you have this kind of this sense of realism and pragmatism in some sense.
Yep. Another topic, it's related to the thing that you just mentioned, that sometimes other VCs, maybe they are not able to address the technology, and so they call you and it's like, hey, Andreas, can you help me with this? And you're like, yeah, of course. But then I can imagine, because we're also trying to build like kind of a tech squad to analyze, like leveraging on the technical capabilities of Telefonica. It's like, okay, let's build a tech squad. So when we do, when we need the technical due diligence properly, we will use this tech squad. But what we found out is like there are people very knowledgeable and very enthusiastic about, for example, cybersecurity. So threats, everything relates to threats to the brand, threats to names of specific people, threats of being tricked with emails and everything. So more like human cybersecurity kind of.
Yep.
We also have people related to 5G, super enthusiastic about it, blockchain as well. But then, so imagine that some of the technology came across, which it did. So for example, one related to IoT, which is also one of the core. So if I go to this tech squad, they will be like, yeah, cool, but I will do it if I have to.
Sure.
But it's not my thing. So how would you do it to be able to address something that makes sense for you, also to not risk your reputation at the beginning? Because if you are stating we are helping you with the technical, this is something that many people need. How do you do it to keep it under control with all the technologies that are out there?
I mean, in the end, this is the nice part. We're not service providers to the other VCs, right? So I think we can always use as a guide. Is this something that is interesting for us as a potential investment? And if not, then we can always say, hey, it's out of scope.
Okay.
So I think that this is actually relatively easy. I think what then is the more tricky part also, since more or less our whole team is also very technical and kind of likes all of those topics, is to find the right point if you're pulling something into kind of the funnel. It's like when do you say no? Because there's always something around the corner that keeps being interesting.
Yeah.
But at some point it's clear that it's not right and not an investment case. So I think this is the tricky part for us internally.
So it's in the other side, let's say, is rather than we need to learn to say no to things rather than we don't have the knowledge.
Yeah, and because I think, I'm just a mechanical engineer. I think kind of in the stack order of engineering and whatever, that's relatively low. We thankfully have kind of physics PhDs and all that kind of stuff in the team. So I would say we have enough smart people that we can get and kind of are well enough connected that we can get a grasp of most things, at least on kind of a high level, and then figure out, hey, is this something that makes sense to spend time on? But I think then, yes, we have to figure out where do we allocate that time, because in the end we're still a very small fund. We're now investing out of the second fund, which is larger than the 5 million, but still not kind of at a several hundred million where you have kind of large management fees to run a research team or something like this. So we always have to have that trade-off. And I think the part that we also feel more comfortable with, or makes more sense for us as well, is we find the team early on, we say it's interesting, we go deep on them, we do our investment process and say, hey, this is something that we want to back. And basically then we have to figure out how much ahead of the general VC market are we? Because it can be that we find something that is super interesting to us, but it will take multiple years until another VC says, hey, this is actually interesting and I want to put money into this. Ideally, we have something where we are like 2, 3, 4 years ahead of kind of this becoming a larger topic. And then I think it's also easier to build kind of this early alliance of some investors that are also still inclined towards technical topics, but maybe don't have that physics PhD on their team, to kind of get in and help the company to mature and then get to the point where, okay, we're now at a Series A or whatever, and the market starts picking up for this type of topic, and they can absorb the capital that comes with the attention in that degree.
And in that sense, do you have a fixed exit strategy normally, or you can ride? Because I think your check was from 150 to 1 million.
Yeah, so it's basically we adapt to the round, but 1 million is roughly the ceiling. Usually we're around 500, 600, 700K. And I mean, our base assumption is that we go in as the first investor and go out with the rest at the full exit.
Okay.
I mean, this is kind of the base assumption, because
Okay,
I think
okay.
you can't plan for secondaries in between and all of that kind of stuff, or it's just way harder to build a fund model around this.
Yeah, I was thinking of some other funds that maybe when they do the first check, they say, we leave when the first large institutional VC gets in. So when my founders are willing to, when their founders are willing to leave 20% of equity because they get chunk of millions, then we're out.
Yeah.
But this, I'm thinking of one specific fund.
Yeah.
So
I think this is in general probably, you can do this maybe if you do relatively small tickets. I think especially for the type of companies that we're investing in, I think even if if a company raises a 10 million seed round or something like this doesn't tell you that this is now a safe bet. It's just they need that amount of money, and there's maybe some more agreement on the investor side that this is an interesting topic. But to get to that point where you really have kind of this value inflection and it's just more people want to get in, then you have to drag them in. It takes quite a bit longer than the first round. And I mean, it might happen that at a Series B, C, whatever, a new investor comes in and says, I want to take this stake. I only get this much from a primary share. Who's willing to sell a secondary? And then, I mean, every fund considers this to some degree, I guess. Maybe not if you just invested, but everyone that invested at an early stage. And then we have to figure this out also together with the founders, because you want to minimize the risk of kind of sending a bad signal of like, hey, this early investor that backed you is now getting out. And I think ultimately in the end, we're not in the business of making kind of average sized returns. We have to have kind of those large outliers. And with Deeptech, you have something of a step curve or step function in a sense that once you have this tech validated and it now becomes way faster to scale, you have kind of this step up in value. But I think it's also still a very long-term bet in that sense.
Yeah. So this million for you is counting follow-ons, or can you even do bigger tech? Or is it too risky for the fund?
No, it's. I think it's with this. The first fund was basically no follow-on money, because we were like, hey, we don't know how much money we can raise, so we need to fit the fund model to the fund size. And for us, the objective was, okay, we need to have diversification, especially since we're investing so early. So we did 27 investments out of the first fund, and the second fund will be somewhere in the same range of kind of 30-ish companies. But with the second fund, we're now doing a decent amount of follow-ons as well, because we see that kind of the technology curve or the technology maturation sometimes takes a little bit longer. Then you need to put in some extra money. Also, you get it at a still attractive valuation. Some other companies don't need the follow-on, but maybe you want to do the follow-on. So having that,
especially if they don't need it, maybe you want to.
Although I think it's kind of something that we learned from the first fund is to be still quite skeptical of big brand names coming in kind of in the round immediately after us, just because it's for the technology to get to the point where it's like, okay, you can check this off now. There's no risk left with the technology anymore. It usually doesn't happen in 2 years. So kind of we have to trust our own gut, not just the big brands coming in.
Which is good because it also allows you to have really hard criticism on your choices, and it keeps you quite awake, let's say. And from the startup side, looking at you, if they look at some other first check investors, also maybe specialized in deep tech, that could be in Germany or even Israel or US, what do you say that is the extra mile that you do that they don't, or that the rest don't? What is this kind of, what is a similar question that you would ask to a startup? Now, what's the secret sauce of First Momentum kind of?
So I think a large part is already covered by this kind of what is the Venn diagram of funds that invest pre-seed and funds that invest into kind of high tech risk topics. So you already end up with relatively small number of funds. And oftentimes those funds also then co-invest, so it's kind of reduces the competition side maybe even more. I think what sets us apart from a lot of other funds, at least in this kind of very pre-seed stage, is that we're really actively working in that beginning phase with the founders. We're not taking operational roles, but I think if you look at other funds that have kind of a longer legacy already, and they started with enterprise SaaS or whatever, they built platforms for SaaS companies, and so kind of how do I run marketing? How do I set pricing? How do I do user acquisition and all that kind of stuff? A company in our portfolio asks us, how do I hire a good chemical engineer? What's a good manufacturing partner for this thing that I'm building? How do I deal with IP conflicts with my customers? So these are topics where I think a traditional venture fund doesn't really offer you a lot of insights or a lot of access to a relevant network, and this is something that we can or are able to build up now over several years of operating.
This is mainly what Lena does, right? That
to a good degree. So Lena, our head of platform, she's running this Scout network, which is also doubles as kind of DD network and then also portfolio support network, because kind of the PhD that can look around at their university might also be an expert in a given topic and can also give you access to hiring great chemical engineers. And then also kind of the broader network around this as well. And then I think it's also a lot of just personal networks of each of the members of the investment team. And kind of each and every one has their own little focus area that they try to kind of get a better grasp of as well. So I think for us, it's really this working together with the founders really, really closely in the first 12, 18, 24 months. And then usually kind of the expectation is the next investor comes in and has their own playbook and whatever that they want to run with you. So I think this is one component. And I think then the other, what I mentioned earlier as well, is just this getting to a really good personal level with the founders as well. Kind of through shared excitement for the technology, for kind of coming from the same background in the sense of, because I think it's just quite different if you went to a business school versus to a technical engineering university, and kind of understanding what the struggles are that those founders go through. And this is super important for us throughout the investment process to just building that personal relationship with them and also showing them already a good part of what our portfolio support would be. So we usually tell them, hey, we see this is basically an open position for you that you need to hire really early on, because this is you will need to onboard that person and kind of you will need their contribution to make it to the next round. And then we already start making introductions during the investment process. Same on the customer side, because I think it's also for us super relevant if we get a potential customer or partner that already says, this looks interesting, I want to speak with those founders. And if we then get feedback from the conversations like, yeah, this looks super interesting, maybe a little bit too early, but we start exploring internally how we can set this up, and then 6 months later you maybe have a pilot or something like this. I mean, this already helps us during our investment process to understand the potential customer or partner side. And so I think a lot of seed, Series A, and later stage funds have these industrial networks as well. I think you usually don't have this at pre-seed, but this is where the point where you need it most. Because sure, it's nice
validate.
Yeah, exactly. It's nice to have 30, 40 intros at a Series A when you have an established sales playbook, but getting one good pilot at a pre-seed stage basically enables you to raise a seed round in a lot of cases. And so kind of getting those connections, be it through our LPs, because kind of the segment of industrial family offices has also grown quite a bit in Fund 2, and also non-LPs that are just kind of loosely attached to us or our ecosystem in that sense, is really, really helpful for those companies to kind of get that early validation, get that early traction, and then go out and, effectively raising the valuation or the likelihood for the next round. But ultimately, I think what the founder buys from us and every other investor as well is money and increased odds of success in some sense.
Makes sense. You were mentioning a couple of times, I think, about the hiring process, like we will help you finding someone. And I've always think the most relevant thing for a startup is the sales, right? But it's true that I remember this study, I don't remember who did it, but it was for basically different degrees of startups and scale-ups, let's say, and what were the needs. So do you think that the sales, so meaning finding clients, is more relevant than the HR, meaning to find the right people? Because sometimes I don't even know, especially in deep tech, which one is more important.
I think it strongly depends on at what point you're asking in the startup's journey. I think at the point where we are usually investing, it's more or less just about hiring, because you're in this kind of stage where you have maybe a lab set up, you want to transfer it out to have the first demo or whatever. And maybe you can do this by yourself, maybe you need a partner to do this. And I think on the technical side, usually the founders have a decent network by themselves, just people that they studied with, worked with. But as soon as it gets to a little bit more senior people and people that are not part of that core network, for example, someone with a business background,
sales team, I can imagine,
or
marketing team,
someone that runs operations. Like if you have a hardware business and you need to deploy a pilot somewhere, you need someone that manages manufacturing, someone that manages local partners, regulation, all that kind of stuff. So getting access to those types of people. And I think then sales is usually the CEO's job in the beginning.
True.
Because I think you don't have anything to show off at the beginning, so you at least need to bring your CEO to make the meeting worthwhile for the counterpart. And also, I think you're learning so much from those interactions.
Of course.
And so for us, I think there is more so opening some doors and letting the CEO figure out, or the founders figure out what are the customer requirements and or which companies does it make sense to partner with. I think it depends also quite a lot on, do you have a technology that has one clear application, or is it more so fundamental technology and you need to figure out like in what order do I enter specific markets. So I think it always depends a bit on when we are investing in kind of the company life cycle in that sense.
So you would say that then the smaller, the more relevant the HR is, and then the bigger?
I think it depends also a lot on the type of product that someone is building. If you're building a hardware product,
I think case by case at the end.
But I think if you're building something that is mainly software that can be tested quite quickly with customers, I think then obviously sales is more important. Or gets important fast or faster. And I think if you're building something where you have to work in the lab and figure out what am I doing here, then hiring probably is the more critical part in the beginning.
Yeah. And changing topic a bit, as we're now in the Wayra offices in Munich, I want to know, and this is a question that I try to ask to everyone, what's your take on CVC? Because I have the feeling that in here in Germany, there's a bit of it's general. It's not only Germany, it's in general, but it's like a little bit of bad fame, let's say, or a bad name, because maybe longer processes, or maybe even too strict taking decisions, or then suddenly they want to buy the whole company, or like too aggressively. What's your take on CVC if you have worked previously? Because in your case also it makes sense. When you were talking about the proofs of concept at the beginning and the pilots, I was like, would be the perfect case for us, because it's like we can try something, we can give them something to play with, but also potentially new revenue stream. So it makes sense to partner sometimes at that level. I mean, in our case, the technology should be a bit mature to be able to play with it. But what's the take? What's the image that you have of CVCs with no filters? You can speak freely.
No, I could. I think it really depends on how the CVC is set up, because I think it's really easy to just set up a crappy version of a CVC and just call, hey, we're doing innovation, right? And I think this is also, if I look at our LPs that come from this industrial side, like this is the typical cycle where you had first doing internal startups, then doing an accelerator, then doing CVC, and you always figure out, I don't have the right people to run it, and I probably also don't have the right governance for it. I think maybe with a family business, you don't necessarily have this of the CEO switching, and so strategy switches, and so the CVC gets scrapped or gets completely rebuilt. But I think this happens with a lot of cases as well. I think for us as an investor, I feel way more confident if it's a CVC that is relatively detached from the main corporate, where they have their own capital pool to manage, and the corporate is just an LP. Maybe the
Just
single
one, not single LP?
might be, or probably single LP, but it's kind of, you have this capital commitment standing, and kind of you can use the capital how you like, in quotations and limits and whatever. I mean, maybe it also makes sense to do it with several LPs in that setup, just so one can't just say, hey, strategy changed, we're just not paying our capital call. But I think the point that you made of CVC being an avenue to get into those industrial ecosystems is super valuable. I think for me the question is more so, at what point do you pull in a corporate partner?
Yeah.
Because I think at the stage where we're investing, it strongly depends on who's the investor on the CVC side. But I think it's way too early for CVCs, because it's just the risk profile doesn't normally match the one that CVCs want to see. And it's also what those startups are doing doesn't match kind of the corporate sense of how I build a product and how I build up a business unit, maybe.
Because they're unveiling new markets, let's say, and it's too risky.
And I think then at a point where you kind of have figured out a decent chunk of the technology, you figure out what your application is going to be, and you're like, hey, now I need a partner that helps me scale this up, or helps me look into a new market segment. I think then it makes a lot more sense. And also, I mean, I think the companies need to have grown to at least some size that you can also say no to the CVC, because I think this is the risk of super early company. CVC comes in and they're like, okay, hey, they can invest into the next 5 rounds for us, basically, like whatever. But then you oftentimes have founders, especially if they're researchers, then they hear, oh, okay, the big CEO is coming by, and they're basically doing whatever they tell them, and they have no clue how to run that startup. So I think it's you have to find the right timing and the right embedding. I think CVC leading rounds is usually also not the best idea. So I think it's kind of it depends.
Yeah.
But I think you can have really nice setups where you have a just kind of commercial financial investor that is setting the agenda, kind of moderating between the CVC and the startup. And then the startup getting a huge amount of benefit from the CVC, and the CVC also getting benefits in return, depending also on what the kind of benefit metric is that the CVC is setting.
Yeah. I was thinking that the way we play it is that, in theory, we allow 70% of the investments are kind of related with Telefonica. But Telefonica is super broad. So maybe suddenly something related to energy or to health, that you were like, oh, why Telefonica? Well, we do many things. And then 30% are related to tech bets. And it could be tech, but it could be financial return too. Like, okay, because we've been doing this for 13 years, so we have the same right as all the VC to say this is good or this is bad. We're going to be in because it's a financial play. And
or it just gives you access to a given ecosystem or whatever,
Yeah, but I agree that it really is, it differs from one CVC to the other. Yeah, as much as VCs or even more, because the CVCs have probably even more personality for the wrongs and for the good than VCs most of the time. That's true. Okay, jumping to a second block that I wanted to cover. It was more related. So this first block covered the whole VC creation in your case, and how do you evolve? What are your core skills and everything? So now, for the startups that are listening, and maybe they are interested in some investment from your side. What are the main things that you look for in a startup? You talk about the teams, like you talk about the smart people doing interesting problems, but is there anything that normally gets your attention? For example, when you think about smart people, I said the top 10 mathematicians. Is it the grade, some indicator? What are you looking for in a group that you say, I want to invest in them?
I think a recurring pattern that we see with founders is usually this kind of really strong drive for or curiosity drive to which I think you kind of need to have to be a decent researcher anyway.
Yeah.
So I think this is given for most founders, but it also needs to be kind of curiosity that goes outside of your kind of limited focus of maybe your research thesis or the field that you're working in. And then coupled with oftentimes kind of, if you look at the history of someone, then you oftentimes see kind of small nuggets of entrepreneurship somewhere. So, I mean, the stereotypical lemonade stand, maybe not so common in Germany. It is, I think, more the American thing, but people setting up kind of small eBay businesses early on, kind of getting obsessive with some kind of weird market niche, or basically running an online economy in some game. We also have some founders that are kind of top 10 ranking in online chess and stuff like this. So it's kind of you are fascinated by how they can do this besides having a normal life. But I think
without having a normal life, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But I think these are oftentimes kind of the things where it's okay. This is not just someone that kind of crosses off the check boxes and kind of goes the researcher path, but they oftentimes go into their PhD or into a specific job kind of with the concept of, hey, I'm doing this because I think this field is super interesting and I want to found something afterwards. Maybe that comes somewhere in between, but it's usually not, I want to be the researcher just researching battery chemistry for the next 15 years. And I do it first at the university and then I move over to BMW. But it's usually, this is a stepping stone for them to get somewhere else. And I think you have this in kind of different combinations in the teams. And oftentimes this kind of, some people are way more entrepreneurial, some are way more technical. And I think this is kind of the right mix to have as well. And I think then the additional component that you need to have also from at least one founder is just the ability to communicate well. Because I think it's great if you have amazing research. It's even better if you want to commercialize it in an interesting industry. But if you can't get anyone excited about it, then it's super hard. And then it doesn't matter if it's for fundraising, for hiring, or for sales. Like you need to have that one person that can communicate why this is important to the outside world. And I think if we are already struggling with this during the fundraising process, then I have a really large concern about how is that person behaving, or how is this company going to behave with customers?
Of course. I'm laughing because I'm remembering a case that we had 4 years ago. I wouldn't say the name of the company, but they're lovely and they're doing okay. We had the investment committee and there were two founders, and they were extremely serious and a bit even arrogant. Like, so the investment committee was saying something and they were like, what the fuck stupid question is this? Like, they didn't say, but they kind of say it with a face. So the technology was impressive. The traction was really nice. The product was solid. The team was well created. Like, we even had a fit with Telefonica, so we tested and we liked it. So everything was perfect. So at the end of the IC was, but if they have to sell more, they're so tough. And I don't know. So it's fun that you mentioned it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in the end, it's also we're not going to be able to invest in every interesting company. And also, I mean, since we're actively working with those companies, it's also you can't have a portfolio of 100 companies running around. So we also have to find the founders where we also feel like, hey, I want to work with that person.
Of course.
If that person calls me, I'm going to pick up and be happy about it, and not just like, that guy again. So I think like this is also something that has to come or flow through the conversation. And I think that then it's also just this, since I mentioned for us, it's also oftentimes more or less an open conversation with the founders. Obviously, we're putting structure around it. But I think this openness from the founders, and kind of counter to the arrogance that you mentioned, where it's like, I'm fine if I'm the stupid person in that conversation. But kind of the founder shouldn't be acting in a way of like, this is a super stupid question you're asking here, but more so, this is kind of maybe a valid point, but we thought about it, obviously, and we've come to the conclusion that the path that we chose is the better one because of reasons A, B, and C.
Yeah, what you said is how you communicate.
Yeah.
Literally how you communicate, how
exactly.
empathetic you are and everything. So I wrote down, by the way, just as a summary, they have to be curious, which by the way, by default researchers are, but otherwise it's difficult to address, because if you're watching a pitch deck or if you're watching a pitch, how do you address that the guy is curious? You need a bit more.
I think you see it in the way that, like, since we're not investing just in PhDs, right? So we also have the technical founders that are just computer scientists that now are building some kind of interesting software infrastructure layer or something like this.
What would be the percentage of PhDs, by the way, if you have it in your mind, roughly?
I would say probably 40%-ish or something like this, because you oftentimes you have kind of maybe one PhD and one non-PhD also in the teams. But I think you also see it from the way that founders are tackling their research or validating hypotheses. If someone is just showing up like, hey, I had this great idea in the shower, and obviously this is a big market trend because BCG has done a market report about it, then it's going to be tough. If they show up with a data room, and I mean, data room is always a little bit overblown of a term for pre-seed, but if they have a Notion page where it's like, okay, we've spoken with 50 potential customers,
I see
then I think it's quite clear that they're like driven to getting to the truth.
Got it. Okay, so I take curiosity. They need to be curious. They have curiosity. They need to. Previous entrepreneurship experience is something that it always helps. Obsessive.
And I would say it's maybe not an experience, but kind of just seeing that people are, kind of either unhappy with the state that exists and they want to change something, or that they do something in general.
Yeah.
Like it's not just existing, but
do something. A bit obsessive, a bit playful as well, because competitive, and then chess players preferred. Okay.
Poker players are fine as well.
Poker player. Okay, let me write it down. Poker as well. Okay. Then now I wanted to jump to something that I was looking before, and it's something that I read it before knowing that we were going to do the interview. That is the Deeptech Napkin.
Yeah.
So I have it right in front of me. I will put it maybe either in the video or either in the description below. So that, like, first of all, for the ones who don't know, maybe they're watching it now. If not, they have it below. Can you just explain what it is and how you come up to this?
So it's basically, we've done a survey from our internal deal flow and other VCs to get a feel for what does it actually take to get funding for a deep tech hardware company, and what are the typical levels of funding and valuation that you reach in different rounds.
Which just, by the way, sorry to interrupt, just for others working in different spaces, hardware deep tech probably is the most difficult, among the most difficult thing to get funded as well. So even, I would add deep tech hardware B2C, even that's the top of the top of the top of the most difficult thing to get funded.
And there is this. So Point9 has published this for several years now. It's the kind of the SaaS funding napkin, which I think has been super valuable for that ecosystem to just have a benchmark for what are average round sizes to have, and then B, for the founders to know what am I benchmarking against? Because I think oftentimes founders are asking, like, what do I need to show to get to the next round? I mean, obviously, it depends. But I think this way you can at least say, hey, I'm hitting those milestones that are in general market average. Why am I not an investment case for you yet? Or what else do I need to show you?
Yeah, and it is true that it changes a lot because if I push it, I can even say that in 2021 with 1 million ARR in a SaaS business, you can almost get to a Series A. Now, if you're not in 3 million ARR almost, it's like, it's not yet ready to go. I mean, that's my gut feeling of what I've seen, which also changed. But do you want to elaborate a bit more? Or is there anything from the results that got your attention, or because the pre-seed post-money valuation 8 to 14 million, which for a SaaS it would be like, why so big? Well, because otherwise you will get super diluted building a hardware deep tech. But is there anything that got your attention for the good or for the wrong from the napkin?
So I think what is quite interesting to see is, I mean, obviously there's large ranges in that sense, because also deep tech hardware is still kind of a huge area. We specifically excluded some areas like biotech and pharma and stuff like this. But,
those are
because it's just completely different game that people are playing there. I think what is still not surprising, but it's kind of a nice confirmation also for founders is usually you don't have any revenue in the beginning or kind of on average. And I think then at the seed stage, you see maybe some revenue, but also not for a lot of companies. And I think this is something that has held back German deep tech and also European deep tech in a lot of cases. And I think it's getting better now that we have more specialized deep tech VCs. But I think a lot of VCs still applied kind of typical SaaS metrics of like, okay, I want to see 1 million ARR from you so that you're seed ready. What is ARR for a hardware deep tech company usually? And B, like, okay, this is insane. Or it's like you sell one unit of your, I don't know, green methane generator, and it's like, okay, this is 20 million now. So it's
that's it. You're building an LLM, and it's like, I just need to sell it once.
So I think it's kind of to show founders as well. Like, I think you need to think way more about what is the de-risking that you're doing versus what is the validation on kind of the hockey stick revenue curve that you're showing. And I think this is kind of the example of the nuclear fusion plant. So obviously kind of the end state is super interesting, but no one will give you that amount of money. Will someone give you a couple 100 million? Probably also no. Except if you know the Saudi prince or someone like this. But I think then you kind of step by step have to go back and be like, okay, what is kind of the de-risking I can show on the technical side? And maybe it's getting the design ready, having research partners and partners on the material side that you then can get the next funding to say, okay, now I can build first kind of small demonstration, or I can go look for a site and kind of unlock grants and all that stuff. So I think this is kind of more so the trajectory that I think deep tech startups have to think about. I think we then had also some topics in there of like, okay, how do funding profiles of technical founders differ from non-technical founders, where you can see that kind of they oftentimes raise less money in the beginning. We can discuss about why this is. One theory is that they might also need less money because they know what they're building. Maybe they're also not able to raise more money. So I think this kind of can go both ways. And you see it in later on that they're able to raise more money in later rounds. So I think kind of these trends as well. But I think that these trends they will become really interesting when we do this over several years. And as you said, you can kind of see the trend line going through there. I think for now it's really just trying to have a contribution to maturing that ecosystem step by step, and having those benchmarks, and kind of giving both investors and startup founders something to benchmark against.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's great to have this, and even if more business will kind of show something as clear as that. Of course, as you said, and it's true, I can read some out loud. Like in seed, the post-money valuation goes between 9 million to 25.
Yep.
Of course, it's wide, and the revenue round size from 2 to 6 million, yearly revenue from 0 to half a million, which is a huge difference at the very beginning. So it's like, yes, of course, it's big, but it's like, yes, I don't need something super. And even you can invest in a seed round that doesn't fit this.
Yeah.
But it's like, can you give me like an orientation?
Yep.
I think it's a great job, and it's great that you share it. So
yeah, no, I mean, whenever someone has questions about it, happy to kind of go deeper on this. Be it me, be it Lena, wherever. I think you can reach us through LinkedIn, or if someone gets in contact with you, feel free to forward.
Sure thing, I'll do. Then I wanted to jump, but I'm a bit scared of time. So I will skip a little part, and I will go maybe straight to the trends in the market. So I wanted to know from your perspective, that you're dealing with new technologies every day, what are the most exciting technologies that you've seen that you think that in the future, and by future, I mean 3, 5, if you want to make it fancy, 10 years, but that you see right now in the market that are like, wow, first, I love that. Second, I think the potential is huge.
So I think, I mean, maybe need to preface kind of the focus area that I have, and then I can also talk about what we're investing in as well. So I focus mostly on industrial tech.
Okay.
So that can be shop floor, that can be supply chain stuff, that can also be industrial climate tech. So they're also the hardware component. And I think in that area, what is super, super interesting is to see companies, and this is not so much technology, but moving away from just being a supplier of the supplier, and just manufacturing this tiny small component or this kind of small software part, and moving towards like being full stack provider of a given product. That can be setting up own factories, that can be setting up own chemical process plants, stuff like this, because I think a lot of startups are realizing there's just too much variance and too much stakeholder management involved. If you have a new technology and want to bring this to market in an industrial world, it just takes way too long to introduce this to the market if you have to kind of sell it through multiple levels and then get it used at some point. And I think the clearest point where we see this is kind of in this whole area of software-defined manufacturing, where it's really kind of thinking from the software, or thinking kind of the software first and then building the manufacturing around it. And because I think there you have the opportunity, if you control the whole environment around it, that you can really kind of push the limits of a technology in this kind of software-driven, software-defined context. And this can be like if we take portfolio companies as an example to maybe make it more tangible. One company is Turn2X. They're producing green methane gas. So they're not just selling kind of the catalyst to produce this, or the reactor, or some component to it, or the IP, but they're actually building an entire unit that is taking in energy and CO2 and producing green methane.
In Germany?
They've set up their first plant in Spain because of kind of cheap electricity. And then pumping it into kind of the gas pipelines for German industrial companies to use this. I mean, you could have thought about a way where you're just kind of delivering the small component, but actually building that reactor yourself enables you to have so much more control over the whole process, over the whole cost profile, how you deliver this to market. And you see that in other parts as well. We've invested in Daedalus, which is a kind of company that does high precision machined parts. So they're not just selling the software to control the robot inside of a existing manufacturing plant, but they're actually building factories to deliver machine parts.
Building the whole factory.
Yes, because they say, hey, there's so much kind of weird variances going on. If we have to adapt to every single old manufacturing plant, then it's just going to be a hell of software development. This way, they can say, hey, we set up the software stack once, we gather all of the data, so we can put in machine learning along the way. So they have kind of a co-pilot to take the CAD design and put it into the machine, produce it at a super high precision level, and they can control all of the variables in there, do it at kind of a fraction of the cost that you usually have, way less manpower, way higher on-time deliveries. And I think this is in the area that I'm looking at, kind of a large trend that also will take a lot of on the capital side to transition to, because obviously VC doesn't want to finance one factory after another.
Yeah, that's what I was exactly. That was going to be.
And the founders don't want to finance this through equity, so you will have more asset financing. You will have more private equity funds coming in later on that say, hey, okay, we understand how to scale up a factory. We'll be your partner. You'll deliver the software to us and kind of give us basically the McDonald's blueprint, and we become the franchise owner. So I think this type of stuff, it's less of a technology topic. I mean, it's kind of basically taking together all of the technology components that have come up in manufacturing over the last 10 years, which kind of under Industry 4.0, some people already are now at 5.0, 7.0, or whatever, IIoT, and advances on the machining side, meeting a workforce that is getting significantly older. Everything is getting more expensive, and so you kind of have to fuse this together in some coherent mass, but you can't just retrofit this to a lot of the existing industrial base, but you kind of have to, in a lot of cases, just take out a part of the supply chain and swap it out with something new in that regard. I think this is kind of one slice of the stuff that we're looking at, that I'm looking at. I think then we have, we're doing quite a bit on the next-gen computing side. So that can be kind of universal solvers for kind of the stuff that sits between the microchips and the AI model, to basically be that communicating glue between them. We're doing stuff on the infrastructure level there, software infrastructure, cloud computing, machine learning. We're doing a lot on quantum computing as well, both on hardware and software, and then also quite a bit on the
quantum on hardware as well.
Yeah.
Isn't it super expensive?
Yes, I think if you look at quantum, it's relatively mature, or it's not a mature ecosystem, but you have kind of had the first wave of quantum hardware that has scaled up, has taken a lot of money. And I think the large amounts of money that are sunk into quantum computing right now is pretty much a function of how hard it is to scale those quantum computers.
Yeah.
And one company that we've looked at and are currently kind of in the process of closing that round. So maybe if the podcast airs, we're done with the investment. Is basically solving that hardware limitation on scaling the core component of the quantum computer. So kind of scaling the qubits at a high fidelity and at kind of reasonable scaling costs. So that this is kind of the bet on the hardware side. On the software side, it's more so this, you have to figure out what are efficient algorithms that fit to specific problems and to specific hardware.
Yeah.
So basically rebuilding what you have on the traditional computing architecture and fitting this to the quantum world, and having kind of this intermediary software stack that is in between.
Yeah. this second one, you said too, like this manufacturing kind of setting up own factories as a trend, which I was not expecting this. But I think I feel that there's a kind of a slight trend in the industrial in general that is like, maybe the delocation didn't work that well. So maybe we need to build it here. But then there's the second problem. It's super expensive. The land is super expensive. The workforce is super expensive. How do we manage to make it then profitable? But very interesting that you mentioned it. And the second one is this next-gen computing. With this one, I could think of from your perspective, that could be one area of interest. But I was thinking that we can even make one episode just talking about this, the trends, because it's so interesting. And I think there's a huge area of like educational area that for the general audience that has not been covered yet in a friendly manner, let's say. Because, for example, I like to dig a little bit into technologies, just a bit. And I find that if I want something educational, meaning easy, it's something super superficial. It will never get into details. And if not, I have to go to the PhD that has a YouTube channel that talks really in detail about it. Do 5 hours with a blackboard and will tell you everything. It's like, we need to find some common ground here. But this I will note this down for the future. Maybe if you want to come, and even with a startup in the case, we could do something quite nice.
And I think this is also a large part why we started First Momentum, because it's I think in general, if you take the general population, like you hear over and over again, self-driving is just around the corner. We will have solved cancer in the next 10, 20 years. And it's super hard to validate, because as you said, then you go into that rabbit hole of listening to some PhDs or professors, and they also then start arguing kind of against each other, because everyone has their own funded research track, and so everything else is just kind of idiocy. And so I think it's super hard to get a sense for where are we actually. And I think then the reality of technical progress for a lot of people is online banking still looks like the early 2000s.
Good point.
Trains keep breaking down. Most of the buildings in Germany don't have AC. We still have the dirtiest grid in Europe. So it's like, where are we making technical progress? And so I think like just having
good rant.
But I mean, like you won't get a positive view on technology if you don't show stuff that is actually getting better. And I think the only part where people have seen tech improving something is maybe on the consumer side. But the rest is basically hidden. And then you still have prices going up like crazy. So people are like, okay, well, what is all of this money that we're spending on research and subsidizing stuff? Like, where is this going? Like, I don't feel it.
That's a very good point. We should maybe build a kind of a show for the government. Like, man, you need to tell the people what you're doing with the money. And
I mean, I think it's not from a bad intent from a lot of politicians, but I think it's just tech is also not good at communicating what they're doing, and I think also I think deep tech is always a little bit of a stupid term. Like, what does deep tech mean? I think the problem mainly is that you call everything that deals with the internet tech, where it's just maybe something else and maybe not so technical anymore. Like, if you're building a price comparison site, sorry, that's not super technical anymore. It was at some point, but it's pretty much a solved problem, I would say. Maybe someone will scream at me in the comment section, but I think there's also this difference of like, okay, is really the technical edge of what we're building, is this really Instagram and kind of improving the algorithms there by a couple percentage points each year? Yes, that's very technical, but I think that's not technical progress as like, okay, we want to have the flying car.
I was thinking that I got a bit stuck when you said what's deep tech. And I've always thought that by default, deep tech is something that is not obvious and that it will take you many years to do. and it's something that will completely, radically change a field. That's what deep tech I would think. When I think of something, is deep tech or not? It depends. Does it radically change the field that it is in? Do you need a lot of money before? Then okay, then maybe is it obvious? Okay, no, it's not obvious. Then could be, but that's as from the outside looking at it, it's like that could be. Is it similar for you?
Yeah, I think that's kind of generally the right direction. But I think if you're speaking with different people, then kind of deep tech becomes like a very broad term.
And the frontiers got blurry.
Yeah,
I would imagine. Yeah, it's like not as much as with AI, because now you're saying the comparison. We do this pricing comparison, and we build AI on top. Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, you have a machine that will say this price was before $699, now it's $652. Is smaller.
But is
that AI?
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's engineering in the end. Kind of the technical stuff is solved by OpenAI or whoever else built the model, and then the company that is implementing has to do some smart engineering around it.
Yeah.
But that's usually not super hard, and it's more so, I think, also to figure out what is the right delivery method for the consumer and how do you make it kind of a good product experience, and not so much about the technical side of things necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I would love to keep discussing about this, but we may need to do it in a different episode.
That's fine.
But thanks a lot, Andrea, for coming. I think it was a super interesting talk, and happy to have you here again soon.
Just let me know you have my number.
I will. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.